The Movement That Shook America by Mason J. Bursler. It was the spring of 1941, and America had been brought into the Second World War. During this time, there was a massive influx of men needed on the front lines of the war. Needless to say, mostly white men. However, during this time, because the white men left the U.S., this left countless jobs open for African Americans to obtain. In this instance, there was the first presidential order regarding African American jobs. The order stated, "There shall be no discrimination in the employment of workers in defense industries and in government because of race, creed, color, or national origin." Even though African Americans were obtaining jobs that were viewed as respectful and worthy of white people, they were still looked down upon, even though some were overseas fighting for our country. This is something in which even some white people wouldn't even do. This act took courage and bravery to fight for a country that lacked the decency to treat them with fairness and equality. In regards to these acts, some even say that it is the war that had started the civil rights movement in the first place. Rosa Parks, or Rosa Louise Macaulay, was born February 4th, 1913. She was the woman who had enough of discriminatory laws in the South of the United States. She had brought notice to African Americans that they should not be treated unequally just because of the color of their skin. She was demanded by a bus driver at one point to give up her seat for a white person. Parks was the first one who stood up for what she believed in the South, and that was enough to have her arrested and charged with a violation of Montgomery City, Alabama Code. This was the start of the Civil Rights Movement of America. The refusal of Parks to move her seat started the first documented large-scale boycott. The boycott was for African Americans to refuse to ride the city buses in Montgomery, Alabama. The boycott lasted from December 5th, 1955 to December 20th, 1956. During this event, it caused Montgomery, Alabama to integrate its buses. However, it also revealed a leader that had come forth to orchestrate the following necessary acts to help gain the respect and liberties that a white man has. Even though the boycott had ended after the federal court had ruled the segregation unconstitutional via the 14th Amendment, the civil rights movement was just beginning. Even though the court case had won in the favor of the African American people, the city as a whole remained very segregated, and in some cases turned into violent acts. However, a man by the name of Martin Luther King Jr., a 26-year-old pastor, emerged as the person who is now known for his nonviolent resistance and as the spearhead of the civil rights movement in the 1960s. After King had become more and more popular and recognized, he realized and understood what mindset the South was in when it came to justice and equality for African Americans. King then rallied the people of the South and held the March on Washington to uphold the equality for jobs and freedom for African Americans. This is also the place where King had made his "I Have a Dream" speech. After the March on Washington and word had spread of King's intentions, in 1964 King also went on to win the Nobel Peace Prize for his perseverance and combat through nonviolent ways for the rights of African Americans. Also during '64, King had also gone to Capitol Hill to attend a Civil Rights Act debate where he had met Malcolm Little, or as most people now know him as Malcolm X. Though the two had fought for the civil rights of African Americans, they had extremely different viewpoints on how to handle the problems within the civil rights movement. Because King had taken a nonviolent approach, Malcolm X had the viewpoint and standing that African Americans have the God-given right to defend themselves regardless of what is being done. The viewpoint in King's eyes stood for the advocacy of violence more so than others. Because King and his viewpoints of nonviolent resistance were so popular, his followers were greater in numbers. He believed that this was the greatest way to achieve the impossible feat of being treated as an equal American citizen. Even though King's public sermons and speeches would gather large crowds, there were still those who were stuck in the old ways of the United States and wanted to keep the nation segregated. Because of the social injustice tensions between African Americans and white people during this time, the extremists of the opposing side of the civil rights movement took matters into their own hands. On April 4, 1968, Martin Luther King Jr. was shot at a hotel in Memphis, Tennessee at approximately 6:01 p.m. and transported to a local hospital where he had later succumbed to his injuries. King's death had sparked over 100 riots within America's cities where more than 35 people had been killed due to the violence and anarchy. After King's death, his vision had still lived on and inspired people all over the country. His voice had instilled hope and promises, however, of a better life for African Americans, but with King being assassinated, the hope seemed to have died. However, in relation to the photography aspect of the civil rights movement of the 1960s, this display and story would be much more difficult to understand without the visual representation of the physical and mental hardships of the African American people during that time. A woman by the name of Olivia B. Waxman is quoted to writing that the photographs had helped expose the cruelty of the segregation and discrimination to the wider world. Now, in regards to my own photographs in relation to our PowerPoint, some may frighten people or scare them, in which I apologize. These are real-life situations in which happen every day that some people are oblivious to. However, this is mine and my huge first responder family helping people. Approaching a scene, no matter how horrific, we were in the position to help somebody, always. That is our job. We disregard personal beliefs or viewpoints because we were the few who are tasked with being the ones who help someone on their worst day possible in their life. We disregard the color of skin or ethnic background or religious beliefs. We are called upon for a purpose to serve our communities no matter who the person is or what they stand for. We sacrifice ourselves so others may live. We live in the mindset that every human being is worth saving or helping. We don't believe in black and white or brown, no matter the color. We think of a victim as a family or children that they need to get home to, even if we don't. There's no such thing as segregation to us. We tend to each person like a member of our own family. Our mission is to make sure the victims have another chance at life without discriminating against race, color, or national origin.